Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody around the world. Really welcome to this webinar, and we're just going to wait a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, while everybody joins us from the different parts of the world. Just please be patient. We're all looking forward to this webinar. Thank you. Yes, good morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon. We're just waiting two more minutes before we start so that people can join us. I can see people are already greeting us in the chat, and please, go for it. Put your name down, introduce yourself. We have over 250 people registered, so we really look forward to seeing who's who in the chat. We'll give it about another 30 seconds and then we will start. I see lots of people that involved in surveying, but also from, other parts of the land sector. So really good to see the global land community getting together to address this really important issue. Okay, I think we should start. So the International Federation of Surveyors, FIG, the Climate Compass Task Force, welcomes you to our first webinar of a 4-year series on surveying and climate. This webinar is about moving beyond business as usual and talking about climate resilience and fit-for-purpose surveying for land, water, and marine. And I'm Clarissa Augustinus, and I co-chair this FIG task force together with Roshni Sharma. And the two of us will be co-chairing this webinar today. We represent both sides of the task force, young surveyors and seasoned surveyors. Now, I'm an FIG honorary ambassador and was the founding director of GLTN, the Global Land Pool Network facilitated by UN Habitat. And Roshni works for Frontier SI, an innovative Australian geospatial company, and is on the Geospatial Council of Australia. So the purpose of the webinar is to have consultations and conversations, hear from our speakers, share knowledge, and build capacity to act and mitigate climate change impacts, the most important challenge of our time. So let's have a look at some housekeeping. We invite you to introduce yourself as you've already started and your organization in the chat. And I will facilitate the first hour, hearing from the panelists and asking questions. Please only pose questions to the speakers in the Q&A box, starting as soon as you want. My co-chair, Roshni, will review the questions in the Q&A and facilitate the second hour of the webinar to hear from you when you raise your questions to the three presenters. Apologies, this webinar is in English, so questions only in English. It will be 2 hours long, the webinar, and is recorded. And that recording will be made available to you after the webinar. So let's work together to see what are the vital issues of our times and what surveyors can do to address climate change. Let's have a quick look at the content background. So before we start, let's have a look at what fit for purpose land is about, because we have learned a lot in surveying on the land side since 2014. So fit for purpose, and it's on screen for you, is about the underlying spatial framework of large-scale mapping being designed to manage current national and local land issues, rather than simply following more advanced technical standards. So key terms are flexible, reliable, affordable, and attainable. In other words, the system can be rapidly established and within available resources. Also, it must be upgradeable, which allows incremental upgrading, and of course, participatory and inclusive, in that it should support good land governance. And ultimately, it has to fit with the national legal, regulatory, and institutional framework. After some initial exploration of the topic within the task force, we realized that there are a lot of knowledge gaps and which need to be filled. And this webinar is intended to start to fill those gaps. So let's see how far we can get today. What are the kind of gaps that we need to fill? Firstly, we need to link our fit-for-purpose knowledge to climate resilience. And what does that mean? It's the capacity of systems to cope with a hazardous trend and respond in ways that keep their essential functions, identity, and structure, but at the same time maintaining their capacity to adapt, learn, and transform. Secondly, we need to create new knowledge on climate resilience, fit-for-purpose surveying for land, water, and marine. And then thirdly, we need to build on existing work on geospatial data and climate resilience, and expand this to cover all types of surveying and all 3 Rio conventions on the environment. So in one of the earlier FIG Compass, Climate Compass blogs, we discussed the 3 Rio conventions for the environment, i.e. climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation restoration. And the fact that land, and therefore surveying, is in the critical path of all 3 Rio conventions. The link for the blog that explains this is in the chat now. So let's move to the 3 presentations from our speakers. Each presenter will have 10 minutes, and we should all try and keep to time to ensure everybody has a chance to speak. After the presentations, I will ask the 3 panelists some key questions from a climate angle. Questions which they might only have partial answers for, or no answers for, but which we need to be asking ourselves. Someone in the audience might have answers. Put it into the chat. This will be for 20 minutes. The second hour of the webinar will be an open discussion facilitated by Roshni, picking up the questions and comments you have raised in the Q&A. As there are so many people attending this webinar, it will not be possible to hear from the audience directly, unfortunately. So please start putting your questions in the Q&A. Roshni will also, at some point in the second hour, be using Slido to try and understand what the shape of our audience is here and what are the issues that we should be addressing. So let's turn to the speakers now. Let me introduce our 3 eminent speakers for today. I will introduce them as one batch so that they will then give their presentations as one batch. The first speaker will be Paula Dijkstra. She is the FIG Chair, Task Force on Sustainable Development Goals, building the second phase. She's the Director of the Cadastre International, the Netherlands agency responsible for the coordination of the Dutch Cadastre's international activities and development aid projects, which provides worldwide advisory services in land administration, e-governance, geoinformation services, and SDI. The second speaker is Uchendo Eugene Chigbu. He is Associate Professor of Land Administration at NUST in Namibia. He is the Global Land Tool Network Steering Committee member and an author and co-author of numerous publications on tenure responsive land use planning, also linked to climate, including for UNCCD, the UN agency dealing with land degradation and land restoration. The third speaker is David Mitchell, and he's the Honorary Associate Professor, RMIT, Australia, and the previous chair of FIG Commission 2. He is the author and co-author of numerous publications on surveying, land, and climate, and on addressing land issues in disaster risk management in small island states. So without any more ado, let's get started with the first presentation. So Paula, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Clarissa. Thank you for the invitation also, Clarissa and Roshni. It's a great honor and pleasure to take part in this first webinar. And my compliments also to both of you for taking the leadership in addressing this topic for FIG. I will start the presentation from the angle of the Sustainable Development Goals in relation to climate. The 2030 agenda sets out provides us with a roadmap for a more sustainable world. And they have identified 17 goals, 169 targets, and 231 unique indicators. So they guide us for global, regional, and local development. I think for all it's clear that the global sense of urgency and the pressure on land have showed the relevance of our profession to contribute to these goals. We hold one of the keys to deliver change and to support with our geospatial experience for a better living. Critical data for global, regional, and national development and policymaking is still lacking. Many governments do not have access to adequate data and their about their populations and also their territories. And that's where we also come in. We can provide data and information about land and how to put it into good use to good land governance, followed by effective land management. So change is needed if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I think we all know at the general level that it's concerning at the stage where we are at. The UN every year provides a report and an update on how we are doing with the Sustainable Development Goals. And in September, they published a new report. Trying to go to the next slide. Let me see. Yes. And we are now at the midpoint of the implementation of the 2030 agenda. It started in 2015, and it's clear from these pictures that we are falling short of meeting the most goals by 2030. There's a bit of progress, but big parts of the targets are progressing too slowly or regressing. Because of this, the UN is sounding the alarm and states that we are at war with ourselves and with nature. And I think the last part also indicates the link with climate, because that's often also nature linked. So we are on track for 15%, 48 off track, and there's stagnation for 37%. So there is change needed if we want to achieve the goals. Today, I focus on the link of the SDGs with climate. Yes. This picture states it clearly. We are at the Earth's tipping point and standing at the brink of a climate calamity. The current actions and plans to address the crisis are insufficient. There is a failure to act. If we do not act, it leads to even more intensifying heat waves, droughts, flooding, wildfires, more sea level rise, and famines. I think we've all seen that happening in our neighborhoods, small or big scale, and how it is impacting people's lives. So to combat the climate change and its impacts by 2030, urgent and transformative action is needed to meet the commitments under the Paris Agreement. And that's why I'm also very pleased to have this session today, so we can start this conversation and keep this conversation going. To take a grasp out of the report, I recommend you to read it. This report with the latest updates on the achievements of the SDGs. It shows that we have to make a fundamental shift of our relationship with nature to avoid further land degradation, species extinction, and forest losses. Also, that we need to pay attention to the ocean's emergency, that we have to protect the largest ecosystem that we have. There are no people living there, but our livelihoods depend on it largely. Also, it's blocking my view, so I cannot read the text. We have degraded land every year, huge numbers of lands, and that impacts also the food security that we have to provide as a planet for our people. So everything is interrelated. Also, we see in the cities where there's a huge problem with the pollution happening. People are being displaced either by war or also by the climate impacts, with disasters happening due to floods, due to hurricanes, due to earthquakes, and it forcibly displaces people worldwide, and the number is growing. Another challenge is what Clarissa also mentioned, is the relation with water, where we have a responsibility, because a huge number of people live in water-stressed countries. And the CO2 emissions are at a record high. So this is a graph from the SDGs, from the report, and this is related to different SDGs in a graphical way. In this slide, I will try to make a connection to the most relevant SDGs that are linked to climate. There are 17, and only highlighting them here. The slide will be densely with text, but I will try to link them with practical examples of what we can do as a profession. For instance, as an example to start with, education is here. Education SDG states nothing about climate, but is of course key to educate people about climate. So for SDG number 1, no poverty, that's where it is also about protecting or providing good access to land for people who are in the most vulnerable situations. So the majority of the people still live outside formal systems, and people outside the systems are vulnerable. We as surveyors have a role to play there. For instance, with implementing further fit-for-purpose land administration approaches, local level, and then also bringing them together at national level. It's key to map all people-to-land relationships as soon as possible. Number 2 is about zero hunger. The number of people facing hunger and food insecurity has been rising since 2015, and we want to counteract that. But we have not been successful till now. We want to avoid further degradation, and we want to invest in land use plans. And that's also where we have a role to map and monitor what's going on in the agricultural areas, to make wise choices in these areas, and to monitor also what is going on. Education I already mentioned. What was shown from the report was that nearly half of the curricula do not mention climate change globally. So this is a huge challenge to make sure that this is embedded in educational programs. And I think for FRG, this is a message that we can communicate with the Commission number 2 to have more attention in how this can be integrated into the surveying and land-related curricula. Gender, also a topic dear to my heart. Many men and women in agricultural production lack ownership and security of tenure rights over agricultural land. In 1/3 of the countries, less than 50% of women and men have ownership of secure rights over agricultural land. And the share of men having ownership is at least twice as high of that of women in almost half of the countries. So this also requires our attention as land professionals when we are documenting these land rights, to have attention for women's access to land, but also of vulnerable and marginalized groups. The water link was already mentioned by Clarissa. This is both on the marine side, but also on the rivers and waterways, and also about drinking water. And what it says in the report, there's a lack of good cross-sector and trans-boundary cooperation. So this is something that is needed because water is crucial to provide water for the agricultural land. So it needs cross-boundary data sharing. For sustainable energy, it's key to know where you can invest in renewable energy, which land is good to use and doesn't conflict with food production, for instance. Sustainable cities is also crucial to us, that we have to provide good housing for people. But knowing that a large number of people live in slums, this is a concern. So these people need to be included into the formal systems. I'm not going to address 13 yet, that will be next, because there's one SDG fully focused on climate. The water aspect was mentioned by Clarissa, and I'm also very happy to see that our community is already focusing on this marine and land interaction and having attention on geospatial information about the marine environment. And for me, 15 is quite, it also brings, while setting the scene that there are a lot of concerns, 15 also brings solutions because if we manage to maintain our forest, if we manage to have a good land use plan, this is also key to solve issues. So this requires also our attention to work on that, to make sure that the life on land and that we have the forest and agricultural areas and more sustainable way of living. So this is for me where there's some opportunity to change. So I wanted to highlight SDG number 13 specifically because this is all about climate and where you can see what is needed. So what I already said, it is urgent and transformative action is needed. It requires ambition and action-oriented efforts. So that's also on us. And maybe later on we can discuss further what needs to be done. But it shows that climate is intertwined with the 2030 agenda and that the challenge is huge. It's complex and can sometimes be overwhelming. But I think we need to step towards it to see what we can do instead of being stand back and because it's too big. So I'm happy to get that conversation started and to start sharing. Because that's for me also what this presentation is about. I'm conscious of the time, so I will speed up a little bit. But for me, UNGGIM is a key body that's helping us as geospatial professionals to provide leadership and goals and what we can do as geospatial professionals. Because with the SDGs, it's crucial to know where progress is being made, and that requires data that we can provide as professionals. So they have delivered useful documents and frameworks that are useful for us at local level, at national level, and also in cross-boundary work. And that's also where I've seen change agents from our profession contributing to these documents. But can elaborate more on that later on. So it's clear that we need to accelerate the achievements of the SDG, and this required timely and highly quality disaggregated data to strengthen the data ecosystems. So as professionals, we can contribute to that with geospatial information about what is happening where. We also can make use of the new data sources and innovative approaches like AI, like remote sensing. Every time there are new opportunities, use that to make quicker progress. It means also that it requires strong data governance, data literacy, and data protection policies. So these use innovation, but also think about these aspects. And with that, we can strengthen data. Yes, will do. Thank you, Clarissa. With that, we can strengthen the data ecosystems. So what can we do to make the next 7 years count to 2030? My recommendations are: make the goals part of your daily work, personally and professionally. Recognize the central role of governments in implementing the goals. Encourage the development of effective policy. Leverage your knowledge, share, document, and link them to the societal issues. And also invest in digital partnerships with the private sectors and all other stakeholders. And a personal message for me is: be ambitious to rescue people and planet. Advocate for the urgency and share your efforts, because that's where we learn and can go faster together. And to conclude, take the challenge and be the change. Together we can make a step forward and make a difference, because that's needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you for that very rich vision that you've laid out to us from the global SDGs. And without further ado, I'm just going to now move to Eugene. Eugene, the floor is yours.
Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see it. It's up and to scale.
Okay, thanks very much. And thank you, Clarissa, Roshni, and my fellow panelists. And most importantly, thanks to the audience. Thanks for the last presentation. I think the last presentation talks more about what the plan is all about when it comes to land. But in my presentation, I'll be looking at the relationships, or summarize the actual justification on why we should actually consider land as a big factor in the climate change discourse, whether it's for mitigation or for adaptation. So the title will be Relationships, Paradoxes, and Opportunities. I begin with an introduction, and the introduction comes around the issue of land use and land tenure. Because when we speak about land tenure, it's about relationships not just with the physical environment, but most importantly with the people, communities, and other issues around us. And land tenure in this relationship has three key components. When we deconstruct it, what we tend to see is that when we talk about land, there are users of land, and these people are individuals, communities, authorities, corporations who use the land. And then there is the issue of institution, the policies and the rules and management and administrative matters that relate to how we use the land, what we should use it for, and why we should use it in the first place, as well as where. And then there's the issue of the land, which is the actual object, the physical object. And of course, it comes along with non-physical matters. So when we look at land as the earth surface, which is the physical, and the institution, and then the people and users of land, what we tend to understand here is that it is a relationship that needs to be governed. And so we speak about land governance. But the key issue here is that it relates to how land is used, how it is transferred, held, inherited, and managed. And when we look at these tenorial issues, one begins to understand that the capacity to cope, adapt, and recover with regards to climate change, or even land degradation in general, has a lot to do with tenure. So land use and tenure are the key words here. So what I'll do next is to connect climate change and land or tenure relations. To do that, there are two ways to look at climate change and land relations. One is the issue of the greenhouse gases. Land is a holder of greenhouse gases. So land stores 3 times as much CO2 as the atmosphere, and 98% of the CO2 stored on land are in forests. About 2.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide, which is about 1/3 of CO2 from other sources, is absorbed by forests each year. So with this, it matters that when we speak about climate change, we cannot negate the issue of land if the land is actually the object or the factor that holds or that can hold most of the CO2, which is, or the greenhouse gases we want to reduce. Then there is the issue of land as an emitter. So land is you can say land is the judge, and also land is the criminal here. So about 77% of the agricultural land on the planet is directly used for raising animals. And that's where the methane comes. And that's also where the cotton trees comes in. And so we all know that agriculture itself is the main reason why we cut quite a lot of trees in terms of deforestation. And so land, you can say there is, I'm not trying to criminalize land here, but the factor here is the use, and that is where the human factor comes in. So land holds the CO2, and the human factor also means that land and how we use it contributes to climate change. And when you look at the diagram here, in terms of the greenhouse gases, you'll see that carbon dioxide is 75% in terms of sources, and methane is 17%, which comes from animal farming. When you put these two together, we're already hitting nearly 90%. And so that's how land relates to climate change. Now, it's not just about this relationship, but it's also about the justification. So there are the paradoxes. One of the reasons why land matters in the climate change discourse, which is something I think we've negated for a while, is also because the main problems that need to be resolved in order for climate change to be mitigated or to be improved all relate to land. And these are things that I call paradoxes. For instance, I've identified 3 paradoxes here. One of them is that rearing livestock reduces cropland while producing less than 20% of calories. So we rear livestock. We still need to, attain food security. But how do we compromise the future of livestock farming, which is central to the survival of billions of people around the world, in order to reduce methane emission, which is a necessity for mitigating and reducing climate change effects? That's a big question. I don't have an answer to it, and it's open to discussion, but it's also a reason why those of us within the land sector or who work, in land-related professions need to begin to be more creative and innovative as to finding climate solutions. The second paradox is that both rearing livestock and cropland reduce forest. But then how do we reduce cattle rearing to conserve land while hoping to produce enough meat for the daily calories needs of current and future generations? We are told not to cut forests, but again, we need meat, we need food. How do we actually balance this? It's a big question for us. The third paradox is that reducing agricultural land is necessary for conserving forests to mitigate climate change. But how are governments expected to put policies in place to ban deforestation when every parcel of farmland is essential for producing more food and for conserving animal and plant species? That's the third paradox. Again, I don't have an answer to this, but it's for us to understand that if we're to mitigate, adapt, or do whatever to climate change in terms of reducing its impact or its negative impact on humanity, the issue of land stands at the center of the discussion, or should be at the center of the discussion. And it means that as land professionals, we have a big responsibility here. Now, I can only speculate at the moment that in order to solve those paradoxes, one thing we need to bear in mind is the need to manage the bundles of rights that exist on land, including the interests and all the quantum of restrictions that are necessary as well as obligations. How we manage them matters, because the solution to climate change effect should be land use. It requires managing and administering land rights to mitigate vulnerabilities, costs, or that we have because of climate change. So how those who have land in this sense exercise their rights matters in mitigating, adapting, or managing climate change effect. Again, this is a speculative solution, but it's clear that from literature that this has worked for land degradation and for other land matters, and all of these are intertwined, and we have to face the same issue here. So it's about managing land tenure or the governance of tenure. Now, finally, I would like to present why there are specific linkages to the climate issue with regards to land. And this is coming from a work I did from the UNCCD on land degradation. I realized that if land is an object of restoration and is an object of degradation, then land is doing the same also, or will do the same for climate change. So one thing that is clear is that people who have long-term rights or obligation on land are more likely to use the land and forest for more productive means following climate change rules. And climate change rules will be determined by tenure. The other is that if people do not have secure titles or provable documentation on land, they are using, they will not follow climate change mitigative rules because they have no defined responsibility to do so. This has turned out to be the majority of the case based on work done by UNCCD. On other matters, the capacity of a forest to act as a carbon sink, as already mentioned earlier, increases with the forest rate of growth and its ability to retain the carbon on a permanent basis. But this cannot happen if tenure rules are not secure. So it depends on adherence to climate change tenure rules. In conclusion, I'd like to state that for us to move on, it's important that we have to follow fit for purpose approaches, because what works for community A may not work for community B. And currently, the fit for purpose sets its key principles around special framework, institutional framework, as well as legal framework. But I think we need to emphasize the social framework as well as the behavioral framework, because it's about change of behavior as well. And from Prindex, the last Prindex data, it shows that even people that have documentation in Africa still do not feel secure. And there must be a reason for that. I think it's something to do with behavior. I don't know what you think, but I'm hoping that we can have the discussion going forward. So thanks very much. And I'm looking forward to having a discussion. Thank you, Clarissa.
Thank you very much. Eugene, for a rich presentation that is very thought-provoking, and I'm looking forward. Sorry, did you, maybe you missed me. I just see that I'm unmuted now. So let me start again. Thank you, Eugene, for a great, rich presentation that is going to raise lots of questions. And remember to put your questions in the Slido. Roshni has explained how to do it in the chat. And now we are going to move to David as our final presentation before we start the panel questions. Thank you, David. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Roshni. And thanks to the previous speakers, to Paula and Eugene, to really setting the context very well. So I've been asked to talk about fit-for-purpose land administration for small island developing states, and to look at some of the land, water, and marine challenges. So this, I think, follows on very well from what the previous presenters have talked about. And so what I want to do was to look at how land administration can be climate resilient. So looking at the land dimension and trying to link it to climate. Then what is fit for purpose land administration? How can it be applied to climate actions? And then finally, a little case study that I think illustrates some of the dimensions of land, water, and marine in the Solomon Islands, and we'll talk about that. It probably raises as many questions as it answers, but that's probably good. So if we think about how land administration can be more climate resilient, this is the work that we've done with GLTN and RMIT University. In the center is an idea of how climate resilient land administration functions and tools can be climate resilient. So we're talking with land administration about fit for purpose land administration, but also geospatial information systems, pro-poor land recordation, tools such as the social tenure domain model, and there's many similar ones. Eugene's talked in the last presentation about how we can apply tenure responsive land use planning, land valuation, dispute resolution, a lot of tools that the surveying community have to bring to bear if we are clear about the climate challenges that are faced. So what I'm proposing here is that we are informed by environmental and social safeguards, We also need to strengthen institutional capacities and information and knowledge systems with relation to climate actions. But the key message I wanted to put forward here is that we need to really understand the climate issues at the community level to bring our various skills as a Surveying community to bear on these challenges. So the idea of a vulnerability, risk, and tenure assessment. Many climate change adaptation, resilience building projects include a vulnerability assessment or risk or both. Quite often tenure issues, land issues come up in that. What I'm proposing is that these are strengthened. So we then have a much stronger understanding of the climate challenges that we face, and that allows us to make decisions on how we can apply the fit for purpose tools. And we've got wonderful tools that can help address land issues, strengthen tenure security, improve land use control, and indeed make it more tenure responsive. So Eugene had a slide earlier about fit for purpose land administration. In some ways, it was a bit similar concept to this. What I think is needed to apply this wonderful framework and tool that is fit for purpose land administration to climate challenges is, first of all, the vulnerability, risk, and tenure assessment to understand at the community level the dimensions and the challenges that need addressing. And then Eugene mentioned the spatial, legal, and institutional frameworks, really just supporting those with spatial framework informed by climate vulnerability and risk assessment, legal framework providing for mainstreaming of climate assessment, coordination with climate disaster agencies at different levels, and addressing some of the institutional silos that we need to break down so that we're not just dealing with land issues, but not considering disasters and climate, and also water and marine. So I'd like to present a case study. I thought this one might be appropriate because of the dimensions of water and marine as well as land here. Solomon Islands, many of you would know, is one of the small island developing states in the Pacific Islands, Pacific Island nations. It's, just out from Australia, north of New Zealand, east of Papua New Guinea. And this case study focuses on Honiara, the capital. So it's, you can see in the map to the right that we've got a map which shows in the darker areas the existing buildings, which are spreading within the town boundaries. There's sort of that geometric darker line there, which is not customary land, a mixture of state land and freehold and informal. And then outside of that line is the outsider, a little bit of Greater Honiara, but it's customary land, and so there's some significant land tenure considerations there. And we can see that it's very hilly. Honiara is a very exposed. Solomon Islands is one of the most exposed countries in the world, and Honiara in particular faces cyclone threats, flooding, landslides, and a little bit of drought in some areas. Significant natural challenges. You can see that it also has significant urbanization challenges, with the settlements growing and in some cases spilling over the township boundary into customary land, and that certainly will continue. It's quite full now, the township and the non-customary land areas. So there's challenges in the informal settlements. They face overcrowding, they face all of the natural disaster challenges, they face problems with poor buildings and poor infrastructure. And I might just move on to the next slide to illustrate this case study in a settlement called Fishing Village. Previous slide indicated it was on the coast, about the middle. And so this had settlers first arrived here in the 1960s, and soon after the government created 25 fixed term estate titles. These are a full title, freehold, and you can see them highlighted there. Since then, there's been many people arrived from the outer islands, many of them family members under the Wontok system, new houses built as new family members come in. And you can see that there's a couple of implications there. One is that they're built across the titles or outside of those titles. And there's second implication is they're built over the high water mark into what is normally customary land. It's grown to more than 60 households. There's 460 people here living in the settlement as of 2009. I think there's 25 people in one house, very, very crowded arrangements. That comes with challenges with water, with air circulation, disease. They've got all sorts of disease challenges there, hygiene. And those who have the original fixed term estate have formal connection to electricity, water, and sanitation, but the others don't. So there's a difference all of a sudden in dealing with vulnerability and resilience with those who have formal title and those who don't. So RMIT, a couple of my colleagues, Darren McAvoy and Alexi Trundle, were involved in the Honiara Urban Resilience and Climate Adaptation Plan. Fantastic bit of work that involved extensive consultation with the communities, with stakeholders, and really looking at the vulnerabilities that exist at the city level and down at the settlement level. So when they looked at Fishing Village, for example, there was challenges around hygiene, as I mentioned, overcrowding, and the community really wanted those issues to be dealt with. They wanted the issues of the buildings crossing over the high water mark to be dealt with. And one of their priority requests was for building a seawall. So that vulnerability assessment brought up a lot of tenure issues, and it's a great basis for starting to make decisions. So I'm not going to present the final solutions here, but it's necessary to understand at that level both the land tenure issues and the resilience and vulnerability challenges, so that decisions can be made. So the seawall is a decision that needs to be made by the national government and the local government in Honiara. They're the ones who would have to build it. They need to decide where it should be sited, but there's implications for the siting of it. If we build a seawall along the high water mark, then the buildings outside clearly need to be demolished and those people resettled. So we need to bring in fit for purpose land administration to provide them with new land, a resettlement plan, and we need to provide them with secure tenure. If it's built further out into sea, then there's a challenge because they're building in, fencing in, if you like, customary land, and there's significant potential for land disputes there. So just a little sample of some of the issues, but the main message here is of the importance on really understanding through assessments, vulnerability, risk and tenure assessments of local communities to allow the surveying profession to really apply their skills and knowledge to improving the resilience and adaptive capacity of communities. We, in doing that, in implementing the action plan, there's significant geospatial information needed. There's control networks, geodesy, GPS, valuation work, land use planning, and of course, land administration. So just one example, hopefully it helps stimulate a bit of discussion. That's all from me. Thanks, Clarissa.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you, David, for okay, I'll just speak to you. Thank you, David, for giving us a very detailed study of what happens at country level, what happens at the local level, how many of the issues are involved at local level, that cover the broad range of all the FIG commissions. So everybody actually has to get engaged in this topic one way or the other. So we're already seeing questions coming into the Slido. Please keep going with your questions for the second hour. If you want to know how to do it, it's in the chat. If you look for Roshni, she has shown you how to search for the Slido and then type in the number. So now, and we're going to sort of I'm going to ask the panel some questions. Remember that the FIG Climate Compass Task Force is focused on building knowledge through strengthening communication across the industry, including consultation and conversation. And the questions I'm going to ask form part of that approach. Each presenter will have the same 3 questions, each with 5 minutes to answer for all 3. We'll ask all the questions and then take the speakers in reverse order. First David, then Eugene, then Paula. Look, they're hard questions. Just feel free to answer them from a global, national, or local perspective, and within any geography or surveying sector. We don't all have the answers, and hopefully there will be answers and questions in the Zoom room. So if you feel you're not ready to answer a particular question, just skip it. Nobody has all the answers. So let me ask you the questions. Surveyors are vital to the achievement of all 3 Rio Conventions, and your presentations have shown that, and their environmental goals of the world. The future of the planet and people rest in the hands of surveyors as being one part of the critical path. So if you use your presentations and your experience, can you tell us, 1, what are the key roles that surveyors are already playing regarding fit for purpose, measuring, managing, and mitigating the present and future impacts of climate change? 2, what additional capacity is needed for surveyors working on the climate crisis? And 3, what are the key climate resilient, fit for purpose, geospatial and surveying approaches that still need to be developed? Okay, so you each have 5 minutes, and I'm going to turn to you first, David. You have the floor.
Thanks, Chris. So not easy questions. Well, the last one in particular, not easy questions to answer, but there's clearly a lot of surveyors working in the climate space. If we include disaster risk management as well, and there's been a lot of work done on how they can contribute to first of all disaster risk management, the different stages, post disaster, before the disaster, trying to understand what's happened before. FIG spent a lot of work on the different commissions and their members and what they can bring to bear. So all the dimensions I mentioned a little bit in my slide, all the dimensions that we work on as a community, many of them can be applied to disaster risk management. And we're seeing increasingly that they can also be applied to climate resilience building actions, climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation. So just quickly, providing high quality geospatial information before a disaster to help plan, and in the event of a disaster, being able to bring in the measurement networks and geodetic networks that are needed and build that capacity. We saw good examples of that in the after the Tokyo earthquake and how they had to restore the geodetic networks quite quickly. We see the land use planners and the valuers having key roles around particularly reconstruction, and land use planning. Eugene's presentation was a wonderful example of how we need to address land use and its relationship to emissions. We know that there's economic challenges around reconstruction, and so all the commissions have a strong role to play. Now, that doesn't include land administration, of course, and that's my area. That's the bit that I know the best. And there's significant potential for addressing land rights, insecure land rights, and also poor land use through land administration. Eugene will talk to the land use planning part, so I won't focus on that too much. But we know that there's significant interrelationships between vulnerability and tenure insecurity, and so strengthening tenure security is part of the puzzle for improving resilience. So what do we need to do that? Well, we need to be able to apply fit for purpose principles, and we need to be able to build capacity with that. And part of the fit for purpose land administration tool talks about how to build the spatial and institutional legal frameworks. And I think beyond that, we need to understand what the challenge is. So we're all very good at applying fit for purpose land administration in many contexts, but what is it that's unique about climate and about disaster risk that requires a specific solution? And I think that my suggestion would be that we really understand and be involved in that community level mapping, and we have tremendous skills at household surveys and social tenure domain model and data gathering that can look at the one to many to one land to people relationships, but also can bring in the climate and disaster vulnerability relationships as well. So I think that we can have a strong contribution there, but we do need to understand on the ground at community level what the challenges are. And just to finish up, key climate resilience and fit for purpose challenges that we are yet to address, well, I think that to my mind is the main one. We need to be very good at doing that. We're starting to see examples of fit for purpose land administration being applied to specific projects, but we need many more. And I think that it's a complex problem. The situation, the challenges vary from every town and city to each other, from country to country. The climate challenges vary, the land tenure challenges vary, the land use challenges vary. So we need to understand the circumstances at that particular place. And I think that the more examples we've got in case studies we've got, the better. I'll probably leave it there, Clarissa. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And we're really grateful for you spending time with us as a leading thinker in this area at a global level, and success going forward. So Eugene, it's over to you for your 5 minutes of response to my 3 questions that I sent you.
Okay, thank you, Clarissa, and everyone that is there listening, as well as my fellow panelists. I think those questions are pretty tricky, and 5 minutes is quite too short for to deal with them. But I'll just be a little bit generic. With regards to the role the surveyors are already playing with regards to fit for purpose measurements, management, and mitigation, I think the role is quite highly diversified, but surveyors have excelled in building special data infrastructure, which many communities and other professionals rely on within the land sector to do their work. And so for me, this is the key strength of the surveyors. However, there's a lack of involvement of the surveyors in the climate change arena. And this means that the surveyor is yet to contribute to this arena as they should be. So there's a huge opportunity for surveyors to make broad input in the climate change arena, which is why we are here. So with regards to what capacity do they have in making this sort of contributions? Well, that leads to the second question. And that means that there's need for building new capacities. And the climate change arena knows no borders. Climate change itself knows no borders. It cuts across different borders in terms of its impact. It cuts across all human and geographical boundaries. And in terms of solutions, it basically demands cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, as well as interdisciplinary knowledge, in terms of building, in terms of knowledge building, as well as knowledge application. So for surveyors to have the needed capacity to contribute to tackling the climate crisis, it is crucial that they strive to be expert generalists. By this, what I mean are surveyors should be individuals who have the expertise in general knowledge in various other disciplines or sectors or professions within our societies, because climate change is all over. It also requires that a lot of surveyors get into management. Also, there is a necessity to see surveyors working in the science policy interface of the climate crisis, and this is very crucial. So in what way can they do this? So with regards to the how-to aspect, that leads to the third question. So, and that is the key climate resilient fit for purpose geospatial approaches that would be needed. Well, David already mentioned about the tenure responsive land use planning, and you will see that my presentations focused on land use. So I'm a fan of the idea that how we deal with the puzzle of land uses, kind of shape the way we live our lives, and climate change is not an exception. So speaking from the land management and land administration talents, I believe that there are already a lot of tools out there. So these tools also, I can put them or summarize them into land use planning, but then they involve data collection, use of analytical softwares, gender, youth, cross-cutting issues in climate, in conflict areas and non-conflict areas. But the main weakness is that these tools are focused on land. At least most of them that I've worked with, that I know, are focused on land, but they lack the direct connection to climate mitigation and adaptation. So I'm of the opinion that the already developed tools need to be modified or remodified or adapted to contribute to climate change solutions, rather than actually focusing on building new tools. But I'm not against new tools. I'm just saying that while we build new tools, it's crucial that we look at the existing ones. And it is possible that we already have tools that can do the job in terms of climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. And all we need to do is basically tweak or retweak one thing within those tools. And so I'm very much for the idea of ensuring that we transform the existing tools into climate responsive tools. Thanks very much, Clarissa.
Thank you, Eugene. And thank you for that challenge that we need to, really think deeply about what we really have and what we need. Paula, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Clarissa, and also thanks, David and Eugene, for setting the scene and providing your thoughts on these questions. Let me see if I can add some things. To start with the key role of the surveyors, when looking at fit for purpose land administration issues or projects that have been successful in the past, that really was also because there was a strong political will that made it to a success. When thinking about the climate change and also the climate challenges that we need to address, I think we can make it work with strong professional will. And this is where the surveyors have this key role. And I see a lot of champions and change agents in our community already. So that's really good and inspiring to see. And to give that as an example, we've talked about the local impacts like David showed in his presentation. I talked a little bit about UNGGIM, where it's about a global level and where frameworks come together. And UNGGIM have prepared documents, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, that provides guidelines in how to exchange and share geospatial information at the country level. But also the framework for effective land administration and the global geodetic reference framework. They have put attention to that. These documents did not come there on their own. They were built and made by surveyors from our profession. So there we've seen already surveyors thinking about what's ahead and what do we need to address. So that makes me very proud of what we already do in our profession. Another thing is that it's good to see that both the task force of the Climate Compass, but also of the SDG task force, the elements are embedded of the Commission's work plans of FIG. That means that there's attention for it, and that's what we can leverage for in the coming 4 years, or what is needed, and to put these topics onto to make sure that these are on the agenda. If you talk about additional capacity of what is needed, one of the crucial points for me, and what we also see in the projects that I execute for Cadastre International, is that it's about partnership. I didn't raise that SDG in my presentation, but cross-disciplinary collaboration is key to achieve the change that is needed. But it requires another way of working than we did before. So we have to get used to talk to other domains and other disciplines to make this change, because there's a pressure on land. Many people have claims on land, and we need to make sure that these are recognized and that we find a solution how to deal with that. So that is something that we need to think about, and also make sure that we have the skills to work in these kind of settings. And also that we have the knowledge and experience to make use of different data sets, and that we know how to exchange these different geospatial data sets from different sources. Another capacity element which I think would be useful is that we try as profession to link the work that we do to the societal issues. So not only focus on the technical solution, but also see what's the bigger impact for society. So that means, what is the bigger added value? How does it relate to the SDGs? How does it relate to climate mitigation? And I think that also is strongly linked in the council plan of FIG, where it's focusing also on people, planet, and partnership. And with that, we can inspire and also make more easy use of exchange of experiences within the community. And that brings me to the last point about the developments. I like the statement of you, David. Well, yeah, the more examples, the better. We have the tools and technologies, like Eugene said. These need to be adapted, fully underline that. But there's so much already out there that can be implemented and used. And to make these changes, as Eugene said, it helps if we have these case studies ready and available to our disposal. So that's an encouragement to our community to share the stories, to bring them forward, to advocate what's being used different, or what do you need, what was missing, why were you not successful. Also, that's key and relevant to learn. And to make it a little bit more practical, for the development, it would be really useful if we have real-time satellite data when there is a disaster happening, or how we can get quick access to that. Also, climate modeling is useful, and to know what is happening. I think in the next few years, seeing what's happening already due to climate impact everywhere, you need to know what is happening when there is a huge volume of rain, or when other risks are happening. What's going to happen with sea level rise? We need to have models that can predict what's happening and who's affected by what. So there are definitely also technological challenges, but I would like to conclude that we have to make sure that we also remain inclusive in what we share, and have attention for the whole world. Sometimes there's a disaster happening somewhere, but it doesn't reach the news, but it's just as impactful as another place of the world. So I think it requires also attention for that. And the reason why I'm saying that is, I was attending the ICA conference in Cape Town in August, and I was really astonished in the research on climate and where that was taking place. And that was, for instance, limited funds went to Africa. And these are things we can also tackle to make sure that we bring these stories together and that we have an inclusive view on the climate impact and what is needed, what needs to happen.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thanks to the panel for answering these questions in a 5 minutes. We understand that these are just starting thoughts and that you'll unpack some more coming out from the questions as Roshni takes you forward. So thank you. And I'm now going to hand over to Roshni for the question and answer session. It's all yours, Roshni.
Thank you so much, Clarissa, and huge thanks as well to all of our presenters, David, Paola, and Eugene. So we are now going to open up the part of the Climate Compass Conversations and Consultations webinar series that's about you, our audience. If you are able to go into the chat, you'll see that there is a link, well, sorry, not quite a link, but there's details of how to access our Slido. So if you're able to please go to slido.com, that's slido.com, and then at the top of that you will notice that there's room for you to put in a code, and that code is written in the chat box and you'll be able to type it in. It is 3876972. So again, you can see that in the chat box to refer to at any point in time, but it is slido.com and the code is 3876972. So we have our first poll, which really we're hoping to find out, which sector are you from? You know, it's always interesting to understand in terms of the people who attend, who is interested in climate, who are the people around the world, and what sectors are showing the most interest. We can see that online at the moment we have a tie between government and academia and research, but the private sector is slowly creeping up there, and we've also got some participation from NGOs or international NGOs. I'll leave this poll up and open for another couple about 30 seconds, so please go to slido.com and then enter in that code and participate in our poll. In the meantime, I wanted to let you know that we only have we've just got 3 short poll questions, and then we're going to open it up to you, our audience, to answer the questions that our panelists just responded to. So start to think about what you think the key roles are that surveyors are already playing regarding measuring, managing, and mitigating the present and future impacts of climate change. Start thinking about what additional capacity is needed for surveyors working on the climate crisis, and what key climate resilient, fit for purpose geospatial and surveying approaches still need to be developed. So I'm going to share my screen and show you the results of the poll. We can see that there's a lot of presence from people in the academia and research sector, which is encouraging to see. As with any other important emerging area, understanding the latest research is really vital. It's really important for something like climate change, where it's existing in a very complex space. As all 3 of our presenters mentioned today, it's highly interdisciplinary, it's moving very rapidly, and our understanding of Earth's complex systems and how they relate to each other, and all the changes that are occurring and the domino effects of that interdependence of each of these systems, it's important to understand those from a research and academic perspective. And it's also important for us to understand from a research and academic perspective, what sorts of solutions could we provide from surveying, from GIS, from Earth observation, from hydrography, from mining and engineering? And how can we commercialize some of these solutions to implement them into active real-world solutioning? So in that essence, we see how there's a link between academia and research, and then the private sector. We also have a link to NGOs and international NGOs and government in terms of advocating for and creating policies to update the relevance of how we measure, monitor, and mitigate, particularly as natural disasters become more common and also increase in how disastrous they are, as David mentioned. So thank you very much to those who have participated in this poll so far. I'm now going to move us on to our next poll. So in this poll, what we'd like to understand is, what are your areas of expertise and interest? Here, please select as many as possible. So tell us about which of these, and again, they are broadly linked to our commissions within FIG. We would really love to understand what are the areas of expertise and interest that you see as being within your reach. What do you feel most connected to? What are you most interested in? For the Climate Compass Task Force, we're collecting this information to help us guide how we design future webinars, and also how we create opportunities for greater conversation and consultation with you as our audience, so that we're able to help you understand how surveying as a profession is relevant to climate change, so that you feel that you have the tools that you need, the information that you need, and also the networking opportunities that you need to be able to be empowered as surveyors to play an active role in creating a better planet when it comes to climate. So we can see here that geospatial data and spatial information management is coming out very strongly. Also quite strongly, there's land administration and land tenure. We have a strong emphasis on education as well, and we also have keen interest across land degradation and restoration, valuation and real estate management. We see building and construction, biodiversity also coming up. So it's excellent to see that there is quite a strong interest across so many of these areas. We're really glad to have this clarity on what's important to you. I'll leave this particular poll open for another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll move on to the last of our polls that ask you about what you're interested in, and after that we'll move on to understanding your thoughts on those same 3 questions that our presenters responded to earlier. So now I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about what climate-related interests are of greatest value to you, either professionally in the work you do or personally in your general interest in climate. What are the things that you would like to hear more about, learn more about, understand complexities within, understand relationships within? What are the things which you would love to see more information on? And at this point, I'd really like to also emphasize a point that Paula made earlier as well, in that all 4 of FIG's current task forces work together. So this information, while it's relevant and being collected by us as the Climate Compass Task Force, it's also really useful information for the SDG Task Force, for example, or the Evolutionary Diversity Task Force, because all of the subject matter areas of these task forces play an interrelated part in the vision that Diane, our president at FIG, has. So I'd really encourage you to, as we think about climate as an interdisciplinary issue, also think about FIG's task forces and FIG's commissions as being interrelated and how they all connect together. So we can see here that in terms of climate and climate-related interests of the people who are online right now, geospatial data and measurement and mapping is coming in very strongly, as is spatial planning. It's really good to see that we have awareness raising and capacity development coming up strongly as well. And of course, land governance and mediation, green buildings and smart cities, climate resilience for fit for purpose land, water and marine, sustainable land management and restoration, how we can limit land use change through boundary demarcation, natural disasters and building back better, climate change and carbon, land consolidation and land readjustment, water and coastal zone management, biodiversity, valuation and natural accounting, and some other. So I'll leave this open for another 30 seconds or so. And as we're just finishing up this one, I invite you to start thinking about what responses you'd like to put forward for the first question that we asked our presenters to respond to. There have been a lot of inspirational points from what they have said in their presentations and also the way that they responded to those questions. So we'll now move on to your thoughts on that first question that they had, which is, what are the key roles that surveyors are already playing regarding measuring, managing, and mitigating the present and future impacts of climate change? As a profession, we know that we are vital to understanding the natural environment and to understanding the social and legal environments, and upholding the legal frameworks that help us to respond effectively and retain sustainability. So please put in your thoughts, and this will come up as a word cloud. So it doesn't have to be sentences, it can be phrases. Would love to hear from you about what you think are the key roles that surveyors are already playing, things that we already do, ways that we already create impacts for climate change and sustainability for a better future. So this is great. We've got geospatial technology and mapping, providing data, of course, monitoring, land rights documentation, professionality, mapping vulnerability, land tool development, data in capital letters, absolutely, creating awareness. And so remember that if in a word cloud such as this, anything which comes up larger than the others means that it's been supported, more than one person has entered it in. So if there's anything that you think is really important, simply type in that phrase again and it will grow bigger in the word cloud. Capacity building, ethical behavior, respecting nature, geospatial infrastructures, education, educating the community, helping people understand what climate impacts are and how they will understand, how they'll be impacted and what they can do about it. Understanding options is one of the fundamental parts of empowerment. policy frameworks, advocating for policy so that we can actually have impetus and requirements for the changes that are needed, renewable energy projects, cooperation, cyber secure valuable data, absolutely. So it's excellent to see so many great responses coming up here. I'm going to leave this open for another 30 seconds or so. So please keep these responses coming. It's great to see land rights documentation and geospatial technology and infrastructures and creating awareness coming up so strongly. These really are sort of three of the most important elements, and they're so diverse in their range of skills required and the impacts that they have. BIM, it's good to see BIM coming up as well. I'm surprised that we haven't seen digital twins yet. I really like that we're seeing here thinking about the next generation. Again, that legacy mindedness is so important to being equipped professionally to make the choices that allow us to create a better future actively. Urban planning, of course, very, very important. Observing physical results, so actually monitoring and understanding data-driven trends. Fantastic. And so much about data and digitalization here as well. Gender equality, yes, addressing some of those big challenges, linking us back to what Paola raised around the SDGs at the very beginning of this webinar. Privacy of data, peacekeeping, the role of fit-for-purpose land administration, reducing greenhouse gases, amazing. And so now our next and final poll, what additional capacity is needed for surveyors working on the climate crisis, and what key climate resilient fit-for-purpose geospatial and surveying approaches need to still be developed? So we're shifting now from thinking about here and now, what surveyors are already doing, to looking towards the future. What additional capacity is needed, and what surveying approaches and geospatial approaches still need to be developed. We're thinking about the gaps. Again, one of the key things that is important for the role of the FIG Climate Compass Task Force, and Clarissa and I have been talking about this a lot recently, is that it's really important for us to realize what the gaps are. We don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes having more questions and thinking about what remains yet to be done is even more valuable than having answers right now, because it gives us direction. It equips us with the strategic knowledge of where we need to actually create solutions. So we can see here that we've got climate education coming up front and center. It is something that's recognized as really, really important. Demarcation of public land, innovative technologies, repositioning the surveyor's role. Yes, that is such a huge thing. Simulation models, ecosystem health assessment, land policy, knowledge management, partnerships. Of course, we can't do things alone. We need to be united, but also we need to work with other professions. Disaster risk assessment, being able to do that better, quicker, faster, in more detail. Thinking green, working in real time, improving knowledge, cybersecurity skills, remote sensing, carbon accounting, yes. Actions for a healthy planet, yes. Climate responsive land use, climate science in general, climate data integration, land policy and land governance, community engagement, climate and displacement. Yes. Amazing. So it's really, really excellent to see so many good points coming up and so quickly, setting an example. Professional ethics is so important for our profession. How do we keep doing that and model that for the world? It's a really, really good point. So I'm now going to stop our polls, and you should be able to see some of the questions that have come up through our Slido. So we can see that there are currently 18 questions. There is also one question in the Q&A in Zoom that I will get to as well. So I encourage you all to continue to go to Slido, add your questions in, but also you'll be able to upvote questions. So you can do that by this little thumbs up that you see in the corner of the question. You can upvote questions. So if there's a question that you particularly like or would really love to see the response to, upvote that question now. I'll start with the question that is in the Q&A in Zoom. So we have Nazreen Ahmed, who is saying, I know that scientists are doing their best to preserve the Earth, but climate change is increasing, and because of it, many devastating natural disasters occur, such as the many earthquakes and destructive volcanoes which occur suddenly and are difficult to predict, and the high level of water levels which cause the disappearance of many cities from the map, as well as the spread of pandemic diseases and viral mutations. How can all of this be controlled? Will the Earth bear all these rapid changes and the depletion of its resources, especially the lack of awareness in developing countries and the high rate of pollution in the major industrialized countries? What is the solution, and is there an alternative to land? So I'm going to open this up to any of our panelists. Would anyone like to begin the conversation on that question?
Perhaps I'll make a start, Roshni, if that's okay. And really, it's a very big question, obviously. What I would do to start this discussion is just to say that we as surveyors can play a key role in gathering data to help support decision making. This decision making is obviously incredibly complicated, but that's an important role that we can play. It's a good starting point and a critical starting point. So perhaps I'll just start with that.
Thank you very much.
I can go next. Well, this is typically what Clarissa said. If you cannot answer a question, also say this. It is a good question. It's a concern that we all have. So in that sense, I recognize the concern. It is not an answer that I can give. But we have to put these questions into the room now to us as panelists, but also to the audience who is participating, to think about these challenges together. And you can see them either as a big chunk because it's affecting the whole of the world, but you cannot eat it in one go. So you have to think about options on how you can tackle that. And in one part of the world, it can be volcanoes. Where I live, we don't have volcanoes, but we have the risk of sea level rise. And I think you really have to look into the particularities of where you are based on where you live, and to look at these national policies. And take into account, of course, also the regional aspects, because often these things don't take borders into account. So you have to think cross-border. But it starts with having data to have information that policymakers and decision makers have can make well-informed decisions. And for me, yeah, so I would say it's one step back to think what can be done to move forward and address these challenges in small bits and pieces.
Thank you. So on a slightly related matter, because you know, Paula, as you said there, I think many of us, if not all of us, feel these sorts of big emotions and fear around the uncertainty of what's going to come next. Where is it going to come? How bad is it going to be? But as surveyors, there are things that we can do. We are professionals armed with unique skills in being able to create and influence solutions. One of the questions that we have from our audience is, how do we highlight the cost effectiveness for governments to protect the climate while grappling with other local problems? Would anyone like to comment on that one?
I can take a first go, talking from the experience of having implemented land administration projects with using fit for purpose land administration, building land administration systems in several countries, or contributing to that as being built, or setting up national spatial data infrastructures. These require huge investments, and that's often a barrier when you think, whoa, this is a lot and that we need to invest. But in the end, you will get a return on investment. And also the question you need to ask yourself, what happens if you do not do this investment? What will happen then? I think for me, that's also part of the solution. Yes, it doesn't come for free, these kind of solutions. You need to invest. But you need to do this in order to avoid worse situations. There are some tools also around. There are frameworks, like Eugene was already saying. There are also frameworks in place that talk about the budget and the financing elements of our profession. So these can really be useful tools also in the IGIF framework for UNGM. There is a component talking about finance, so that helps you to break down these elements and to learn more about how you can think about these elements also for the investment that is required for this.
Thank you.
Perhaps I can just add a little bit about the project in Honiara. So it was funded by the Adaptation Fund, and significant budget to do some of the implementation works. Things like building evacuation centres and improving the drainage capacity and things like that are obviously significant costs. And so there's a lot of great resilience building work being done, but it is expensive, and that's part of the challenge. But I liked Paula's comments with regard to that.
Thank you, David. We have another question now for Eugene. How can we monitor the link between land use and carbon emissions using remote sensing and such technologies?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Actually, I don't know how. I don't know, but the only reason I would like to say something is, first of all, that even within academia, I have come across remote sensing experts who do not consider themselves willing to be part of land administration. So I think that's where it all begins. I've come across GIS experts who don't understand that their work relates to land administration. So I think there's a confusion within the surveying profession. From my background, I assume that anyone who studies surveying has studied land. But in reality, you do have various aspects of surveying and who actually are crucial to land management, land administration, that in reality within the sector, they see themselves as surveyors, but really do not see themselves to be part of the land sector. So for instance, you talk about remote sensing. Just like GIS, remote sensing, photogrammetry are tools for monitoring. And but they are also tools used in various other works, but they are linked very much to land. So I would say that the first aspect of monitoring is for all surveyors to take a responsibility and commitment that their work, whether it's about measurements or adjustments of measurements in development, relates to land. And then we need to begin to tease out the climate aspects. It relates to different professions within the surveying industry. It relates to different different surveyors differently in academia, in the government, and wherever. And remote sensing is a highly technical aspect of surveying, but it is a tool. So I think there is a need to for more specialization, for more knowledge, and then to link this knowledge to more policy-oriented or collaborative aspects of land administration, such as land use planning. And so I think within land use planning, what makes it a pertinent area is that it provides a platform for softwares to be used for different surveyors and non-surveyors to work together. So collaboration and is the first start, and capacity building would be a first start to any sort of monitoring. Thank you.
No, that really helps. That explains a lot. And you know what you say about how broad and diverse our industry really is, and how we need to work together more to be able to share our expertise with each other, to strengthen our role, to be able to come together and support other professions and other industries and other sectors is really wise, Eugene. We have a question here that I'm curious. I'm not sure if any of our panelists here have much expertise on marine surveying, but there's a great question about what role does marine surveying play in climate resilience? Does anyone have any idea of the percentage of storage in oceans and water bodies compared to forests in regards to carbon? So that's a question from Sebastian. And I'd really also like to encourage, if there's anybody online who might have expertise in this area, please feel free to put some information, links, anything into the chat. But I'll open this up to our panelists now. And if you don't know, it's quite okay.
I don't know the answer to the question about the storage in oceans and water bodies, but maybe to add and to share a little bit of knowledge what I know, but it's not my core business, but maybe is of interest to the participants, is again, coming from the UNGGIM, there is more attention for the marine geospatial information. That how do you deal with that, and how do you integrate it with the land? So, and which standards do you use? Because these are large bodies, there are no physical boundaries in the marine environment. So how do you deal with that? How do you measure data? Also to find information about our biggest ecosystem that we have on the planet. So it's good to see that there's attention for that. I know that last year in May 2022, there was a seminar also on this aspect in this domain. And what I know and see in several events taking place is that there is also more attention to this integration of the coastal, especially for the coastal areas, on how the marine environment and the land environment are connected to each other, and how you make sure you can integrate it into one geospatial system so you can really see what impact is with one of the other. Especially since a lot of the cities are near coastlines, it is key that there's attention for this.
We haven't yet talked about. Sorry, Eugene. I
sorry, David, and then Eugene.
We haven't yet talked about hydrographic surveying, but you know, there's a clear role for hydrographic surveyors in this, and it just further illustrates the broad range of ways that the surveying community can contribute. I don't have an answer to the question, but I just think that's it's worth highlighting hydrographic surveyors. And as Paul has said, there's been a lot of work done, other commissions looking at the marine management, coastal management as well, particularly from a planning point of view. And so I think that we we deal with this issue on the edges, but not specifically what was asked.
Mm,
Well, can I?
please.
Yeah, so on the issue of carbon storage in water, I think from papers that I've read, I mean, the numbers quite vary, but yes, but it's good to bring this up because carbon is not only stored, in forests and land, but the ocean, I believe, from the data I've been reading, contains about 38,000 gigatons of carbon, and also continues to take up carbon from the atmosphere at the rate of 1.5 to 1.7 gigatons annually. So I think the oceans do carry quite a lot of carbon, but the ocean is always in a state of flux. The land and the forest tend to, carry three-quarter of most of the carbon. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question is from Winnie, and it says, to combat climate change, it is necessary to have geospatial data. Will this task force look into which countries haven't yet set up a national SDI and make recommendations? I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here and pass this to my co-chair, Clarissa. And just to note, in case anyone on the call doesn't understand SDI, that means spatial data infrastructure. But I will also open this up to our panelists because above and beyond, this task force is made up of its members, and Clarissa and I as co-chairs are just here to understand what you value the most and help provide opportunities for you to network, discuss, and learn on this.
Thank you for that, Roshni. I think that as we explore and as we go down the way, as the sliders have shown, is we are trying to find out what you think. And Winnie, thank you very much for that guidance. And we're acknowledging your role as a vice president in FIG. And perhaps we can have conversations between us as we go down the line, because we know that geospatial information is absolutely critical for to reach all our environmental goals, and that actually it should be part of our SDIs. And maybe the question to us and within FIG is, how do we do that? What are the attributes? We know that Peter van Ostrom is doing a land administration domain model, which will include marine data, for instance, and that will also obviously inform the SDI development. So thank you very much for that question and guidance.
Can I?
Please.
Yeah, I would just like to add that when it comes to special data information or building special data infrastructure, of course, the data is always there. It's a question of whether we pick them out, and use them. And in areas where I've been able to study in the course of my work in land use planning in a place like informal settlements in Uganda, I've seen communities build their own data because they understand their environment, they understand the relationships that exist within their environment. And so the information is not available in most places because several countries haven't built an infrastructure for this. But at the micro level, even small communities have to make efforts in order to generate their own data from the way they live their lives and from what is around them. And this is the importance of land use planning, because for every land use planning project that I know, where there's been conscious effort to build a data infrastructure, it's always led to something like that, whether it's in Namibia, where we are working in informal settlement at the moment using STDM, or in Uganda or the Philippines, where I've been in the past. In fact, in the Philippines, there's been an informal settlement where there was no data infrastructure. They built theirs and built a station for it using STDM, and now began to collaborate with municipalities, and this is also the case in Uganda, collaborate with municipalities who now use their own infrastructure for decision-making, policy decision-making, and social decision-making. So I will end by saying that where it does not exist, these fragments of micro data infrastructure could be built in order to build a more nationwide or regional-wide infrastructure. But let's not take for granted the efforts of communities, and we can use them to build a foundation for spatial data infrastructure where none already exists. Thank you.
Absolutely. Paula.
Yeah, I would like to add on to what Clarissa mentioned, and also Eugene, linking it with the IGIF, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, because that gives the basis and the guideline for developing or strengthening the geospatial information framework that's existent in a country. So mapping what's already there and see how you can bring that together, which stakeholders you need. And they use these 9 pathways. So this gives a guidance in how you can set it up and how you can further develop this. And they also provide guidance how you can deliver a country level action plan for countries. And there's also the SDG Data Alliance that has provided funds for countries that are building up their SDIs in relation to also having data to report on the SDGs. So it's interesting to hear from them as well. They are supporting countries who have limited frameworks in place to further enhance that. So in that sense, it's good to raise this awareness, to share these stories also in the FIG communities, to make that known, and that we can also inspire and learn from that.
Please, David.
Yeah, look, I agree with those comments, absolutely. And I'd like to just perhaps think about it from the dimension of trying to link climate actions and land responses, land, marine, and water responses at the policy and institutional level. If we think about it at a national level, if a country has a national climate policy, climate change adaptation and mitigation, or indeed a disaster risk management policy, in implementing that policy, they're going to need significant geospatial data and national data sets and the infrastructure to be able to use that. And so that becomes another imperative for developing national spatial data infrastructures.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would also like to note we've got some really great comments in the chat. So Daniel Roberg has been putting in some great comments. I'll read them out because I think they're really valuable. Land rights infrastructure, so cadastre, land registers, etc., are the foundation of the 3 pillars of sustainable development: social, economic, and environmental. By implementing such LRI, we as land surveyors are playing a role of peacekeeper by anticipation, i.e. preventing land conflicts, climate change mitigator, i.e. providing land data and preventing settling people in risky areas, and disaster managers in support to local authorities. We should avoid implementing marine cadastre separated from the national cadastre. National cadastre should include marine rights in one national cadastre. This is because many RRR are covering both land and water areas. Really thought-provoking, useful thoughts there, Daniel. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm now going to ask our last question within this discussion that we're having. And again, thank you so much to our audience. We have had over 20 questions come in. That, it's overwhelming to see this level of interest and engagement with the topic, to see so many people who've been online participating and curious, wanting to learn, wanting to ask questions. So the final question that I have, and it's really such a shame that we don't have more time to go through more of these questions here put forward by our audience, is where did it go? How do we, as young surveyors, encourage the profession to take ownership of climate more proactively rather than see climate as an over-the-horizon issue? I'll pass to each of our panelists in turn. Volunteers for who would like to go first. So that question again, how do we as young surveyors, and I'm glad that we have young surveyors on the call with us today, encourage the profession to take ownership of climate more proactively rather than see climate as an over-the-horizon issue? Something small to finish on, you know. Eugene, please. Oh, hang on. You might just need to unmute, sorry. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. So of recent, we started the Young Surveyors of Namibia. So that was just launched last month at Namibia University of Science and Technology. So this is pretty a good question because it's one of the things we mentioned. I think first of all is that we need to give the young surveyors opportunities to be part of the decision making, you know, within the overall spectrum of our professional leadership. And I think the FIG is doing that already. What I don't know if the nation-based surveying organizations are actually doing that, but so there are two ways. One part is to continue the awareness and campaign and get the young surveyors involved. And the more direct way is to get the young surveyors who have the ideas, who have something to give, something to share, to be directly involved and perhaps be part of the decision making as well as part of the solution building of you know, for these things. The reason is that young surveyors are the future, both in the profession as well as within the you know, within our communities, and sometimes they come up with fresher ideas than those of us who've been doing this for too long. So I would think that our collaboration should not exclude the younger ones, and the collaboration should not just be about having them in, but it also means that when we have them in, we should allow them to have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Paula, I can see you're deep in thought. You must have lots of important things to say on this.
Lots to share. Is definitely also reflecting back on my own days as a young surveyor. I'm a retired young surveyor, but in these days, be bold, dare to go and just make the difference and be the change. That's what I encourage young professionals to do. It's in your hands. We need the change agents. So yeah, be this advocate for change, share your stories, share your concerns, make sure you are being heard. And I see it as my responsibility, same as Eugene, to put young people in the position that they can make their voice heard, that they are represented in panels, that they are involved in the talks that we have, because we need all generations in this discussion. We need to have all different point of views and knowledge and experiences in the room. And I think together with that, we can go further even.
Thank you. David, we're ready.
Thanks, Rusty. Yeah, look, I haven't got a lot to add to what Eugene and Paula said, but I think probably the last thing in that is that it's up to our leaders now and more senior people to listen and to really take these comments on board, and part of that is through perhaps mentoring young surveyors as well. So yeah, that was my addition.
Thank you. So it has been a beautiful, very thought-provoking conversation and consultation that we have had today. I'd like to extend on behalf of Clarissa and myself as co-chairs of the Climate Compass Task Force, as well as our core team who were really instrumental in putting this webinar together, and most of all, our Climate Compass Task Force community, all of you online today with us, for making this such a huge success. And a special thanks to David, Paola, and Eugene for sharing your wisdom and really connecting a lot of these dots to help us as a community dealing with an emergent problem that is complex, that is constantly evolving, to help us find our feet for why we as a profession are relevant to climate, how we can remain so, and how we can influence the future of humanity in a powerful way. You know, we've really learned here in this webinar, we've seen some case studies that have helped us to really picture in greater detail, in greater resolution, the importance of why we as surveyors need to take charge and really be more active on the role that we play in climate. I'll pass over to Clarissa now for any further closing remarks.
Well, thanks, Roshni. Just to remind us that our second webinar is coming up in November. If I'm right, Roshni, it's November the 10th. So we'll be sending out links so that we can continue this conversation, trying to dig deeper and deeper into the issue, because it's our challenge, and we're in the critical path, and we're a solutions-oriented industry. So let's start figuring out the solutions. And thank you very much for a really rich session. Thanks, Roshni.
So as Clarissa mentioned, the link to register for that webinar, which is called Redesigning Our Land, Water and Marine Surveying Systems to Make Them Fit for Purpose for Climate Action, is in the chat, bit.ly/FIG-CCTF-webinar-02. I also really encourage you to find us on LinkedIn and follow our page. So you'll be able to search for us in LinkedIn, on LinkedIn, or go to the link that we have in the chat there. We post very regularly. There is a growing community, and we would love to see your comments, get discussion going on our blog posts, and it's a great place for you to learn the latest information on climate-related posts and content about climate for surveyors. And also you can join our mailing list to stay up to date with all of our webinars. As Clarissa mentioned, we have a webinar coming up in November, and we also have our very first interactive online seminar run across 3 time zones occurring next year in February. And we have a range of great events coming up at the Ghana Working Week. So please join our mailing list and follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date on these. Thank you again for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for the engagement, the questions, the comments. We've loved having you with us, and we hope to see you at our next events. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.